here.
Divide b by b.
Yeah. What were you going to say?
I was gonna say GCF. but-
GCF, if you could pull out one in factory, yeah. Kevin?
See, and A is 1.
A has to be the number 1. Is the spot in my A spot 1? Meaning, is this 1?
Yes.
Really? It says 1 right there?
No, no.
No, it says A. Which means if it's not a 1, what do I have to do? Yeah, divide everybody by A. This is where it gets a little nasty, but you're just going to have to follow me here. A divided by A does now give me 1x squared plus B divided by AX plus C divided by A. 0 divided by A is just 0. What is the second step for completing the square once I get A to be 1? Huh? Not yet? I have a step before that. Yeah, get rid of this initial C value. So to get rid of it, we're going to subtract it. That leaves me with B over AX, and then we're going to do our plus blanks just like we were doing on the complete the square homework. Once I have the plus blank, I'm going to try to fill in the blank. So what do I do now? Yeah, I half that middle number. So I'm going to take 1/2 of the B over A. That gives me B over 2A. What do I do once I half it?
Square.
Square it. Sorry, my 2 is just not, I'm not looking right. Square it. If I square that, what do I get?
This would be
2b over 4.
B squared over 4A squared.
Perfect. B squared over 4A squared. All right, so that crazy number, we are going to add both sides. Now, I'm going to just sort of rewrite this left-hand side because I'm not going to touch it yet. I have this fraction over here I have to deal with. I need common denominators. One denominator is an A, the other is a 4A squared, which means they both need to be 4A squared. So I'm going to multiply this denominators, top and bottom, by 4A. If I do that, I get a negative 4AC, putting everything kind of in order, over my 4A squared, over B squared, or sorry, plus B squared over 4A squared. Alright, so now I can go ahead and simplify my sides. On the left side, even though that's crazy and you don't want to be doing AC method, you should still be able to tell me what my parentheses squared would be by following the pattern. What's my parentheses squared?
B over 2A.
Perfect. X plus that number that before you squared it, so it's X plus B over 2A. Yes?
I thought one of the math commandments is you cannot divide by a letter.
No, the commandment is I can't divide by 0.
I thought that you couldn't divide by a letter either.
No, you divide by letters all the time. Alright, coming off to this side. Now, when I add my fraction together, we don't really want this negative in front, so I'm going to reverse this a little bit and call it B squared minus 4AC over 4A squared. If you know where we're headed, you should start to recognize at least a small piece of this. Now what do I do?
Square root.
Square root both sides. All right, I can't square root the top. Who knows what B squared minus 4AC is? That's just kind of a crazy number. There's too many letters there. I don't know. So I'm going to do plus or minus square root of B squared minus 4AC. But I can't square root the bottom. What do I get? 2A. Ooh, we're starting to get closer.
Question, is this what our homework's going to be with all these letters?
No.
I already told you what we're doing. All right, From here to get x alone, we're going to subtract the b over 2a. And then because I wrote too big, I have to swing this up here. What's nice when you subtract it is notice I have common denominators already. Remember our procedure though, the number here can't go behind the square root, so we're going to throw it in front. And I'm left with x equals negative b plus or minus that square root all over my common denominator. You have just created the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula comes from somewhere. It doesn't just sort of appear. Now, here's my question to you. We created the quadratic formula by completing the square, yes? Right? We just completed the square. I have quadratic formula from that. Here's my question. Does it matter whether I do completing the square or quadratic formula? No, they're the same thing. They're the exact same thing. Because we just got this formula from completing the square. So you can do either one. The pros of completing the square is that you won't ever need to simplify your fraction. In other words, you typically don't need to take the square root, pull out pairs, and simplify a fraction. If you do quadratic formula, you almost always have to do that. Bless you. The pros of the quadratic formula is that it you don't create fractions when a does not equal 1. You had a couple of those like that on your assignment last night, and they get kind of crazy because you have fractions inside of there, and then we're square rooting fractions, and it just becomes a mess. You won't get that. The other pro is that it goes straight to the answer. Because I now have x equals some number over here when I input all those values. So I go straight from my problem to my answer without much work at all. Can I erase a little bit here? Yes, now moves up? Yeah. Alright. Ultimately, the last thing we'll say is that you can always use either one. Again, the quadratic formula is completing the square. It's the same use. It gives you the same answer. You can use either one. Now, at this point on your quiz, it requires you to do at least one on completing the square, which means you have to know how to complete the square for at least one of them. After that, I don't care what you pick. But if you decide that you hate the quadratic formula, you don't want to do it, you'd rather do completing the square, that is your option. You can. Realize it might take you a little bit more work, but you can always do that. You don't have to do quadratic formula. If you decide you like quadratic formula, you don't have to complete the square except for that one question on that one quiz. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, we can't talk about the quadratic formula without playing the video. And there's some people in here who have never seen the most awesomest video in the whole entire island.
That's lucky for that. Every time
And we do have to watch it at
Is
least
it that
once.
rap?
If we don't watch it at least once, we can play it twice. That would be fine as well.
Who's that?
Hi, boys and girls.
Are you ready to learn the quadratic formula, son? Cool! X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Isn't this fun? This is great.
That was awesome.
Let's try it again. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Let's do that again. Let's try and make it a little bit different. I don't know. Make it a little rockish. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Cool. Maybe we can sing it a little bit faster. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. That was fun! Let's try it a little bit slower. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Oh, that was so nice. So sweet. Let's just sing it one more time. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Divided by 2a.
That was a stupid.
It's the best video in the whole world.
That was so weird.
Somebody get my lights, please.
I will never get that.
I know, that's why it's the best video. Alright, we are gonna do 3 examples together, and then we'll kind of make a conclusion based off of these 3 examples. And then we're done, so we can get into our homework time. Once again, I'm going to fly through these examples because, again, you should have hit this extensively in Algebra 1. You just need kind of a little bit of a refresher. So if we go through example number 1, we got 2x squared plus x equals 5. We're back to taking notes. You must be equal to 0 before you can identify what the a, the b, and the c is. So I minus the 5 from both sides. Making sure to put it in order because we don't want that to mess us up either. And then we declare our ABCs, but remember when you declare your ABCs, you cannot pull a letter down with it. It's only numbers. So what is your A? 2, B, 1, good. C, -5. Again, notice no letters with the ABCs. You only pull numbers down. Now the next step is to go into your formula. Everywhere we see an A, we're going to write 2. Everywhere we see B, we're going to write 1. And everywhere we see C, we're going to write -5. So negative of a -1 is, or sorry, negative of a 1 is -1. Plus or minus square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times -5. All over 2 times 2. Again, I'm just plopping down my numbers for my letters. Next, I simplify the square root. 1 squared is 1. -4 times 2 times a -5 gives me a positive 40. This is the step you need to be very careful on because if you make a mistake, this is where you make it. This sign back here is going to change depending on how many negatives you have there. So it could be plus, it could be minus, it kind of depends on the numbers that you have. That's going to be over 4. Add the 1 plus 40, that gives me 41. And before you can say that you're done, you have to check a couple of things. The first thing that you have to check is if you can break down the square root. In other words, can you break it down and pull out any pairs? 41, I can't break it down, so that square root is done. Once you break something down, at that point you have to see if all three outside numbers have a GCF. If they do, then you can reduce. What do we mean by outside numbers? Well, I have the -1. You would have to have a number in front of this square root and then the number on the bottom. All three have to have a GCF before you can reduce it. If only 2 of them do, you have to stay. You can't reduce that any further. Questions with that? Can I erase and we can do number 2?
Okay.
We're good? All right. Number 2. X squared minus x is equal to 5x minus 9. So we've kind of made our equation look a little weird. So again, got to make it equal 0. So I'm going to subtract the 5x from both sides. That gives me x squared minus 6x equals -9. Go ahead and add the 9 to both sides. Gives me x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. I'm going to pause for just a second just to tell you that this factors. So after we get out of this week, if it factors, you do not want to be doing quadratic formula because you take something that I can finish in 3 lines and you turn it into that whole big mess of the formula, not to mention you might make an error in the signs, okay? So after today's assignment, you need to be double checking. If you can factor, you need to factor it instead. What is A? B? C. So go ahead and plug it in. We got x equals negative of a -6 gives me 6 plus or minus square root. -6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9 all over 2 times 1. That gives me 6 plus or minus square root. -6 squared gives me 36. -4 times 1 times 9 gives me -36 all over 2. 36 minus 36 gives me 0. Notice I'm not looking at anything in relation to the outside numbers until I finally have that square root. What's the square root of 0? That means if I can take a square root, you need to take that square root. Does it matter whether I add or subtract a 0? No, you're going to get the same answer, right? So really, I have 6 over 2. What is that? So 3 is my answer. If this was the square root of 25, you would have 2 fractions that you have to create. One with the 6 plus the 5 over 2, one with the 6 minus the 5 over 2. Again, you'd have to take it down to the 2 answers. You cannot leave it in square root form unless you cannot take the square root. Questions there before we do our last one? Yeah.
If there was like a negative in there, would we do the imaginary
So
number?
glad you asked that. Can I erase?
No.
No.
Want to? Thank you.
How about now?
Well,
What about now? Yeah, one more. I said 3. You guys don't listen. Number 3 is -x squared plus 2x equals 2. Again, I have to make it equal 0, so I'm going to minus 2. Gives me -x squared plus 2x minus 2 equals 0. Now, we're going to pause. There is no rule in quadratic formula that says the front can't be negative. But I told you before, if the front is negative, it messes up the factoring, right? And you really should be looking for factoring first. Not to mention, if I keep the front a negative in quadratic formula, it creates way too many negatives inside of my formula. It creates a negative at the bottom, which I then have to fix. It's just kind of a hassle. So my recommendation to you is to go ahead and divide the -1 out. Now let's pretend for a second, so don't change your notes, but let's pretend that that was a 3. I would not divide by -3 because I'd create fractions. So I'd still only divide by -1 in order to get the negative away. Does that make sense? All right, so if I divide by -1, that gives me x squared minus 2x plus 2. Now that the front is positive, I can declare my ABCs. Again, that's not something that you have to do, but I would recommend it. What is my A value?
1, Ms.Kurtz. Why did you divide by -1?
We just went through like a whole
Yeah,
discussion on
I
that.
did.
If you have a negative in the front, it's going to make your simplifying of the quadratic formula a lot harder.
Alright.
That's the only reason. But you should be checking the factor first, right? And if you remember, I can't do AC method with a -1 in the front. Make sense?
Yes.
All right. Plugging in at A is what? B?
-2.
C. 2. So plug those in, I get x equals negative of a -2 is 2, plus or minus square root of -2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 2, all over 2 times 1, again replacing all the ABCs in the formula. -2 squared gives me a positive 4. Notice this front answer is always positive. -4 times 1 times -2 is a -8. What is 4 minus 8?
-4.
What happens if I have the -4 inside? Yeah, I get an imaginary number. In Algebra 1, we stopped and called it no solution. You're higher than that, you're better than that. We go on into imaginaries. That gives me 2 plus or minus what? Plus or minus what? 2i. Yeah, I didn't hear the 2. You might have said the 2. Once you have an I, remember we have to keep our real friends and our imaginary friends separate. So we're going to do the 2 divided by 2 plus or minus 2i over 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is just I. Does that make sense? Now, let's pause for just a second. Number 1, how many answers did I get from example 1? How many answers did I get out of that? So we go back to this first example. How many answers are shown here? Huh? 2. 1 with the plus and 1 with the minus. So we get 2 answers from the first example. Second example, how many answers did I get? And the third example, be careful with this answer, how many answers did I get?
2.
I got 2, but they were complex, right? So whenever you talk about the quadratic formula, they start to talk about something that controls that formula.
When you switched over to the imaginary, like why did you do that instead of this?
There's a negative inside the square root.
Oh.
All right. So whenever we start talking about quadratic, we start talking about what we call the discriminant. And that is the b squared minus 4ac part. It's the part that's underneath the square root. If that is a positive number, then you get 2 real solutions. If that is a negative number, then you get 2 complex solutions. And if that is equal to 0, you get 1 real solution. So like I said, it's common that at this point they start to ask you questions related to those facts. Okay? Make sense? All right, take out the worksheet that you've been working on this whole time. If you turn it to the last page talks about the quadratic formula. So the side that says quadratic formula on it. On that worksheet, you are required to do 17 through 37 every other odd. What that means is that you will be doing number 17, number 21, 25, 29, 33, 37. Then you're going to do 47 through 55 odd. My requirement of you for tomorrow is that you get through at least problem number 37 tonight. If you don't feel like you can do that, then I expect to see you in the morning, or you should be talking with other people and trying to get there. If you get to problem number 37 tomorrow when you walk in, the moment you walk in, you will sit down and you will start working on 47 through 55 odd. This is the deal I make with you, but again, it whole sort of depends on, do you walk in with problem 37 done? If you are working on 47 through 55 and you are not done by the time I want to grade at the end of the hour, then what we will do is we will set a cutoff point. Anything that you have done after that cutoff point would be extra credit. And we would still grade and turn it in.